development and asked for her then almost 1,000-acre estate called Reynolda if it could be turned into a bird sanctuary. So that date, did I give the date? The date goes back to January 29th, 1941. So that was before the war. And we were not actually living at Reynolda then. We were living in Greenwich, Connecticut. And I believe her motivation for this probably came more from living in Connecticut, because at that time, a number of bird sanctuaries were being opened up in that particular area. But she got the got the okay on that, and these huge signs were put up, which I do remember, at the Reynolda entrance. I remember one, but I think there were more than one. They were very big. I wish we had photographs of them, because I can picture them perfectly in my mind. And they, of course, had all the listings of the things that people would not be allowed to do on the Reynolda property. The most important of which, yes, the most important of which would, of course, been no hunting. But the one I recall, the one that was closest to us, by the way, I should say that by the end of the year of 1941, after Pearl Harbor, Mother moved us all from Greenwich down to Reynolda. So we are there or here by that time. And the requirement, I think, that we as children noticed the most was that our cats had to wear bells around their necks. And we had a lot of cats, so it was always a little bit like Christmas time. So anyway, the bats, the cats wouldn't go after the birds. Mother actually says in one of her letters, she said, I don't know why we have to do this. She said, who says cats destroy birds? Our yard is full of both. So Mother was a great gardener. And so there are a number of quotes about her annoyance with the birds, particularly a robin that she thinks must have read the sign, because he just stands right and over her and watches her in the strawberry patch until she leaves, and then he comes and eats all the others. So that's the one time I went bird watching with Mother. Again, this comes from her letters. She said that a man by the name of Magie, M-A-G-I-E, if anyone knows who that was, I'd love to know, called to say that my brother Charles would have to do the bird spotting this year. And Mother says, but Charles doesn't care and does not know one bird from another. But Barbara, and that's me, and my sister Bessie could give a full report right now. They have noticed all. And Mother says, so I took Barbara with me to do the bird spotting today. And that was in December 1944. It was quite an unforgettable experience for me, which I'll mention in a minute. It had nothing to do with birds. We didn't find anything the only thing we found was a sapsucker, which was a beauty, according to Mother. She says, we heard loads of birds, but saw few, even with field glasses. Our toes were frozen. So ice on the ground may be the reason the birds did not appear. Seems likely to me. There are lots of varieties, even though we did not plant feed gardens this year. I forgot about the feed gardens, but I do remember them, that she had planted all over Reynolda bird feed gardens right on the edge of the fields. However, during the war years, they were not kept up because there just wasn't the help around to keep them up. But I can remember them as being all dried up and so forth. If I don't know how much time I have, but when we went bird watching, we were standing overlooking at the Reynolda Lake. And there was something in the lake that was looked like a boat cover. And Mother and I stood there wondering, what could that be? And I can remember saying, maybe it's a dead man. And Mother saying, oh, poo poo, She doesn't admit she said that, by the way, but I remember being put down a little bit for being so imaginative. Anyway, it was about a month or so later that late one cold night, my brother didn't come home for dinner in time for dinner. And we got worried. The telephone rang and he said, I'm at the lake and I've just pulled out a dead man. So, of course, we all jumped into Mother's little car called a Crosley and drove, because we were living in a cottage then. We were not living at a Reynolda house. And we drove over, and indeed, my brother and his friend Dick Sapp had rode out to see what that thing was in the middle of the lake. And they pulled out a dead man. I shouldn't laugh, but it was pretty horrible. He was a black guy who apparently was retarded. After the police came and they got some background and said, he probably walked out on ice, and the lake actually had ice then, and just drowned. But it's an unforgettable experience. So for the rest of my life, I'll probably connect birds with dead men. Anyway, I know there's one more thing I wanted to say. I think that, which is interesting, you probably already know this, is that one of the reasons that there was such a flourish of protecting birds in the early part of the 20th century was because, I think as some of you know, it was very fashionable, I think at the late 19th century, for women to wear stuffed birds, real birds on their hats. And suddenly, they woke up and said, well, the songbirds are all gone. Where are they? Well, they're caught and stuffed and put on women's hats. So that caused a furor, of course. And I think that was one of the motivations for the interest in bird sanctuaries in the early part of the 20th century. So that's sort of all I have to say.
Well, thank you, Barbara. It's fun to have a little firsthand background on this from your perspective and the fact that you lived it. So I definitely thank you for sharing with us. And with that, I'm going to take you out of the spotlight, Barbara, but I do also want to, I think everyone who's enjoying the cherries needs to also thank Barbara for her pivotal support on that project. And it's bringing a whole new light to the gardens, and we thank you for that. So with that being said, I'm going to now turn it over to Kim and let her take things off. And I don't know if I said this at the beginning, but Kim is the engagement director for Audubon North Carolina, which is the branch of Audubon. What's the
state office of the National Audubon Society?
Yeah. So I'll turn this over to her. She has been a resident here of Winston-Salem for 15 years. So I'm sure you've been out here plenty of times.
Great. Thank you, John. Thank you so much for having me today and for being such a great steward along with your whole team of the amazing habitats for Reynolda. Barbara, that was such a perfect setup to what I want to share with the group today too, in a couple ways. One, the founding of the Audubon Society, for which I work, was those feathers for women's hats. So 115 years ago, a bunch of people, mostly women, horrified at the slaughter of these birds, got together, got the Migratory Bird Treaty Act passed, and sort of just laid the groundwork for this, 115 years of grassroots advocacy for birds in the places that they need. So it hadn't occurred to me, that sort of the link between that whole movement, Reynolda is part of that as well as Audubon is. So that's so cool. But also for the first 9 years that I lived in Winston-Salem, I walked at Reynolda every day. And I basically raised my daughters there. They're 14 and 17 now, but we spent hours and hours in those woods. And, you know, our most unforgettable experience at Reynolda was finding a stash of peacock feathers by the stone building by what used to be the pool, also known as the Dragon Fort in my family. So you just never know what you're going to find. But, you know, I will say those early days, I think, are the reason why my older daughter, Josie, during the pandemic, just started taking her own hikes in nature on her own. And that's sort of her refuge. She's an avid mushroom forager. I think a lot of us, probably a lot of you on the Zoom today, like, we hope our kids will share our love of nature. And it feels so good when that comes true. So anyway, so I'm here today to share Birds of Reynolda, and with an eye toward the plants that they need to live their lives. I have pictures of birds to show you and some stories of birds. They're very heavily skewed towards spring, because spring, I think, is certainly making me happy right now. And I hope the same is true for all of you as well. So I'm going to go ahead and share my slides. Really quickly. Whoops, how does that look? Okay, great, great. And so I'll share some birds and some stories and some plants that they need, with a couple of how-tos at the end, and then hope we just have plenty of time to talk. I see familiar faces out there and new faces, and it's always fun to talk about birds. So here's, of course, the eastern bluebird, the redbud tree, one of our beautiful native trees and birds, just a great combo. So starting, kind of closing out, you know, this moment where winter is fading and spring is rising. Of the 181 bird species at Reynolda, right? 181 bird species have been documented at Reynolda on ebird.org. So just for a moment, think how many birds you can name. I can't name all 181, but it's because Reynolda has such a tremendous variety of habitats. So from the grassland meadow, which features a lot of native species that are providing these seed resources and flowers and other things that birds need to survive, even the very habitat structure they need, to the woods, which are deep enough for some of our forest interior bird species to live in and raise their babies in, down to Lake Catherine. So anywhere there's water, and especially as varied as Lake Catherine is in depth and vegetation, and flow rate, you're going to have more bird species. So no surprise that Reynolda is really one of the very, very most favorite locations for bird watching in all of Winston-Salem. Arguably the best for spring migration. So I'll get to that in a minute. But right now, I just want to share a couple photos of my favorite winter birds. So these are birds that are here in the winter. They brighten our, you know, otherwise dreary winter days. This one is the hermit thrush, able to stay here in Winston-Salem for the summer, because there's food to eat, because there's berries that persist through the winter, which are, you know, a thrush's favorite food. They love to eat berries, from American holly berries to eastern red cedar berries, wax myrtle berries. You know, all of these are in abundance throughout the woods at Reynolda. Just to show you just how adorable this bird is, you can see his little characteristic pot belly. That's how thrushes do, they're like robins and bluebirds. They're kind of pot-bellied looking. And then, you know, you can know the hermit thrush by his rusty red tail and his incredibly cute habit of lifting the tail and then lowering it slowly. So keep an eye out for these birds. They're still around. They are, like I said, they're only with us in the winter, and they will fly north soon enough. Another winter favorite is the white-throated sparrow. This bird is only with us during the winter, and will leave for Canada to breed up there in the forests. But, you know, this is just a bird that will brighten your day. If you look, when you see a whole bunch of sparrows kind of scattering in a brushy area anywhere along the meadow, or really anywhere in Lake Catherine, this is one of our more abundant sparrows during the winter. So keep an eye out for those. They have this little that little yellow patch. They have a little bit of yellow there, right at the base of the beak, in all their plumages. So it's nice, it's nice when a sparrow has something that's distinctive, because otherwise they're just streaky. Another must see before everybody leaves for the winter and we get all of our spring birds back is the ruby crown kinglet. You can't always see that little ruby crown, but it's very cute when you can. These are singing now. You might catch a scrap of a song that you don't recognize. It starts with a really neat do 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 ascending notes, and then just this little tiny bird, one of our very smallest birds other than hummingbirds, just will babble away in this burbling song that will just make your day. They're also super active. I don't even know how it's possible to photograph them because they're always bouncing around. So you can also know them by their movement. And then, so as winter fades, the pine warblers start singing, and these birds are a little bit hard to see. They're one of the few warblers, this whole big group of 35 or so species that we could see in the eastern half of the United States. Most of them migrate south for the winter to Central and South America, Mexico, and South America, and they just a couple species stay. So the pine warbler is one that's able to stay. They rely on pine trees. They're almost always found in pine trees. And the male will start singing in February. So sort of before anything is green, right? We don't even really see a lot of buds by the time the pine warbler starts singing, but it will make this beautiful trill and kind of start to wake you up and make you realize that winter won't last forever. The birds will do their thing soon. And it's just such a treat to see this bright yellow bird, totally different from the American goldfinch alongside of me, but just a real treat. If you put out suet, pine warblers will often come to suet, especially when it's really, really cold. And then the brown-headed nuthatch. So one of my very most favorite North Carolina birds, this little nuthatch is often upside down, lives across the southeastern United States, wherever there are lots of pine trees. So this bird is even more dependent on pine trees than the pine warbler I just showed you. In fact, they're almost always found on pine trees, whether they're foraging for the caterpillars that eat the pine needles that then the nuthatch eats, or they're grabbing the pine seeds and stashing them under bark, saving them for later. So again, this is another bird that stays with us year round, in part because they're stashing pine seeds and they have that year-round food source available to them, so they can live here. They also like to use old pine trees for nesting, and brown-headed nuthatches they like to make their own cavity. So this is a really tiny bird, right? They like to make their own cavity with their beak, and they choose such a very rotten tree stump to do that usually, that they only last about one nesting season before the stump just falls over. So they're really cool. They also will use nest boxes. So if you've been around Reynolda over the last few weeks, you've noticed some very shiny new nest boxes placed there by our wonderful Forsyth Audubon. So it's the local chapter of the National Audubon Society, one of 9 chapters in North Carolina. And they've invested in fresh nest boxes. You'll see that the nuthatch boxes have a very tiny hole, about 1 inch in diameter. For comparison, a bluebird box has a 1.5 inch diameter hole. Turns out if you just put bluebird boxes out, the bluebirds will eject the nuthatches pretty much every time. The nuthatch just cannot compete against a bluebird. But if the hole is too small for a bluebird to get in, then the brown-headed nuthatch has a great chance of using that box. So if you are in the mood to put up birdhouses at some point, it's a great idea, if you have space, put up houses with a variety of hole sizes so that you can support more birds. So this is a favorite, another bird that's, a very high priority species conservation wise. They are declining in part because they depend so much on dead trees. And, the more our state becomes developed, the fewer places where dead trees are allowed to stand. And another reason why, Reynolda and especially the area around Lake Catherine are so special. That's a place where there's always a lot of trees where birds can make their cavities. There's snags, as we call dead trees, that just make the perfect habitat for these cavity nesters. So the brown-headed nuthatch is nesting now. So these birds that are with us year-round often get a much earlier start on nesting in the spring than we would kind of think about it, right? So they can have eggs by the first week of March. So this slide is a list of the very best trees for baby bird food. And to explain that a little bit more, I'll actually come back to that slide. To explain that a little bit more, here's the other bird that can use those tiny nest boxes, right? A Carolina chickadee can also get into that 1-inch nest hole, and also will use natural tree cavities as well. But here's a nest full of baby chickadees and eggs. I don't know if you all want to vote on whether they're cute or ugly. I'm not going to say. But to feed just that one nestful of young chickadees, it takes a mom and dad chickadee about 9,000 caterpillars. So I know, I see people going, oh, those of us who have fed a newborn human or a toddler who just is ravenous all the time have only a tiny idea what that is like. So it takes about 9,000 caterpillars. And to a very, very great extent, the chickadees are finding those caterpillars on these tree species. So, thinking about your own yard, if you have a big oak tree, if you have a big cherry tree, a big birch tree, I know I just planted a river birch in my yard. I do not have a huge yard. I do not have room for an oak tree, but fortunately there's lots of options. Maples, even blueberries, the blueberries that you buy for blueberries for you to eat are actually really, really strong, what we call larval host plants. So basically, these are the trees that support the caterpillars that feed your baby birds. If you've got these, your chickadees and many, many more generations of chickadees are going to have enough to eat. And the reason why is because these trees are adapted to North Carolina. They're co-evolved with the insects that live here. So native insects tend to eat native leaves. They're very picky eaters often. So often moths and butterflies will only lay their eggs on a certain range of tree species or plant species. And it's the ones that are familiar to them in an evolutionary sense. And so those are the things that their caterpillars are going to eat. So I've just made that sound more complicated than it is. But basically, these trees have dramatically more caterpillars on them. Too small for us to notice and up in the tree canopy, but that means that the chickadees have enough to eat, along with all the other songbirds. And over 95% of all land bird species actually depend on caterpillars and other insect food to feed their babies. So they've just got to have a lot of protein to grow that quickly from a tiny egg to, a bird that's 4 or 5 inches long and can fly. They just need a ton of caterpillars. And just for one comparison, our North American oak species support more than 500 different kinds of caterpillars. Whereas a ginkgo tree is very beautiful, however, evolved on a different continent. And so our North Carolina caterpillars do not view those ginkgo leaves as food. And a ginkgo is essentially a food desert if you're a chickadee or any kind of bird looking for insects to feed their young. So you hear all this buzz about native plants at the Reynolda Gardens plant sale, and it seems like almost everywhere else you look now. And it's, birds give us one of the strongest explanations of what difference does it make whether I plant an oak or a ginkgo tree. So returning to spring migration, gosh, just keep your eyes open this whole spring, starting now, all the way through really the first or second week of May. There's just going to be an amazing array of birds coming through. It's a time when it just feels like anything is possible, like seeing a bird as beautiful as this red-breasted grosbeak. This is a male. The female is very striking too, but she does not have the rosy chest. I've seen plenty of these at Reynolda, and they're passing through, and they're just absolutely glorious. Look at that big beak. Yeah, a bird that we only get a shot at, a few weeks a year, seeing this amazing bird passing through. I mentioned warblers earlier when I was talking about the pine warbler, and there's quite a variety of these that we could see coming through. When you see they're really obsessed looking bird watchers at Reynolda in April and May, this is what they're really hoping for. They're hoping to see a warbler. This is perhaps the most exciting of all, the Blackburnian warbler. I've seen one male at Reynolda, and it's just a tremendous gift, and it's a reason to keep looking up. And again, it's a bird that's just passing through. They don't breed in North Carolina. So there's so many species of birds that we just get a shot at in spring and fall, and that is one of them. This is another warbler. This is the blackpoll warbler. Black and white, we see this bird every spring. It's the last of the warblers to arrive. Usually it has a very high-pitched call that's pretty distinctive, kind of sounds like I've seen this one many times standing right by the boathouse, at Reynolda, looking up into those trees. So a lot of these birds, you can see them from the parking lot sometimes. They're just everywhere. They've traveled all night. They have dropped down before dawn or when they got hungry, and they're just in the trees looking for food, looking for the insects that are feeding on the fresh leaves that have just emerged. They're looking for water. Again, water runs all the way through the woods at Reynolda. It's just an outstanding place to find birds of all kinds. But this is a cool warbler because it reminds us really of the majesty of bird migration, and humbles us with how much we still don't know about birds after studying them very, very closely in North America for, a couple hundred years. So this bird is regularly seen in the spring in North Carolina, but almost never seen in the fall. And in fact, their southward migration in the fall was a huge mystery until a few years ago, when some of these birds, the technology was finally light enough to track some of these tiny, tiny birds. This is about a 5-inch long bird. And it turns out that they do something crazy in their southward migration. They fly all the way out into the Atlantic Ocean, making a huge arc all the way around to get south. So instead of coming south, like south along the Atlantic flyway, so south along the eastern seaboard, they fly all the way out and then come back in. So they go a very long way around. Those of you who are sailors like me in a past life will kind of understand that that's a way of taking advantage of prevailing winds. So they travel a longer distance, but it's probably an easier journey. So just a great reminder that birds have still so much to teach us. On into the summer, lots of birds breed at Reynolda. This is a green heron. I grew up in Florida. This is my favorite heron. My heart leaps every time I see one of these. They're really ridiculous. Look at how thick its neck is and how long its neck is compared to its body. Just a really fun bird. They definitely raised babies at Reynolda last year at Lake Catherine. So I want to challenge you all to keep an eye out. They will build a nest, a few feet above the water in a tree, but they want to be right there where there's water. So Lake Catherine is perfect. This is what a fledgling looks like. So a green heron that has left the nest. And this year is special, as you're looking for breeding birds and noticing nests and getting excited when you see birds that have just, they're fuzzy, right? You can tell they've just come out of a nest. Keep the North Carolina Bird Atlas in mind. The Bird Atlas is a 5-year project. It's led by the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission. They have full-time staff devoted to the North Carolina Bird Atlas. It just began March 1st. Audubon North Carolina is a partner, and they have priority blocks all across the state. Just very briefly, the idea is to do more systematic surveys of the birds of North Carolina. You know, a lot of our birding data are from the places where people are most concentrated, which is very important to understand. But the Bird Atlas takes a broader look and is trying to address gaps in our understanding of the abundance and distribution of certain bird species. So the cool news is that Lake Catherine and about half of the woods are in a North Carolina Bird Atlas priority block. So I can put that information in the chat a little bit later, but we're just looking for anybody. You know, this is a type of community science project where you don't have to know, you just need to be able to identify the bird that you're looking at, and you're really watching for behaviors. So it's really, the goal is really to find those nests and to confirm which birds are actually raising their babies in various places across the state. So much fun. Perfect for beginning bird watchers, for people who, you know, you enjoy watching birds at your feeder. A really good segue into community science. I checked the eBird map this morning to see if hummingbirds nobody's reported hummingbirds locally yet, at least on eBird, but it shouldn't be long now. So again, another amazing sign of spring is these ruby-throated hummingbirds, our only breeding hummingbird in North Carolina. And obviously Reynolda is a great place to see them. So keep an eye out for those. When I give a full length, like truly gardening focused talk, I talk a lot about the kinds of flowers that attract hummingbirds. It's not just red tubular flowers. Lots and lots of them, you know, they'll come to the phlox that you might have blooming in your garden as ground cover, you know, those little purple flowers that are out now. They'll come to the white flowers of Virginia sweet spire, you know, they will show up. If you've got columbine, that's often the first flowers where you'll see ruby-throated hummingbirds. And of course, there's some native azaleas too throughout the woods. I bet you're going to be selling. I hope you're going to be selling those at the plant sale, John. I don't know. But here's just a really, I think, one of the most stunning examples of a North Carolina native azalea. I know I moved here from Florida many years ago and planted a bunch of azaleas from Lowe's that I thought were native. Turns out they're not. The ones that are beautiful and keep their leaves on year round are not North Carolina native, but North Carolina has a bunch of gorgeous azaleas that will lose their leaves, but that's okay because they make up for it with these amazing flowers in the springtime. I would be remiss in talking about the birds of Reynolda without mentioning the eastern meadowlark and other grassland birds that have a chance to find the food that they need and hang out at Reynolda because of the native meadow restoration. So it's a bird I always look for. They're not super often seen at Reynolda, but it's always possible to find these in the meadow. And it's just a really cool grassland bird with a neat song. And, you know, among a goodly number of our bird species that are declining. So grassland birds across the board are declining. And, you know, thinking about land use changes and mowing practices, it's not too surprising that that's happening. But this is a good bird to keep an eye out for. This is my current favorite bird, the wood thrush. So I mentioned the hermit thrush earlier. That's our winter thrush. And then in the summertime, the wood thrush will be with us. They should be arriving in, well, around between April 10th and 15th or so. And this is a bird that's really special to be because of its beautiful song, 3-part song. It can sing harmony with itself, has 2 sides it can sing out of both sides of its voice box. So that's pretty cool, even for a bird. And it loves a deep, dark forest. And so this is a bird that you can hear singing at Reynolda as the summer goes on, trying to raise their babies in the forest. This is another bird that reminds us how much, you know, we still have yet to learn about bird migration. A lot is known about sort of the broad pathways that bird species follow during migration. but relatively little is known about where individual birds go. So our First Sight Audubon chapter worked a couple years ago with the Smithsonian Migratory Bird Institute and National Audubon Society to be part of a tracking project where we put little tiny GPS backpacks on wood thrushes up at the Bean Shoals access of Pilot Mountain State Park. We got one of the birds back and were able to download the data, and the bird had gone to Belize. So, and that was actually the first time someone had confirmed where North Carolina wood thrushes spend the winter. So that bird, you know, is making that basically 3,000-mile round trip each year to continue and raise babies. And a wood thrush can do that maybe 10 times. So it's pretty cool. They really like to come back to the same spot to try again to raise their babies. So keep an eye out for the wood thrush. John mentioned earlier, I think before a lot of you joined, but was kind of asking, you know, what should be on our sort of hot list of more bird species that we should plant at Reynolda specifically for the birds. And spicebush is my number one answer. You know, spring bird migration is fueled on insects who are coming out on the flesh of the first leaves of the year. Fall migration is a really different story. So birds, as they make their journeys south for the winter to a place often with more food, to make those southward journeys, songbirds are mostly fueled by berries, and specifically by berries that are very high in fat content. So these these berries are about 50% fat. So it's the perfect snack. You know, if you're a wood thrush, you've traveled 300 miles overnight. Songbirds travel by night. It's cooler. It saves them energy, and state the obvious, hawks will not be picking them out of the air and eating them while they're flying at night. But this is the perfect food for a wood thrush to find, you know, after a long night's journey. These berries being 50% fat, they will gobble them up. They get fat again, and then they're able to make another 300-mile journey and another until they've reached their winter destination. So this is a top one. It's a great understory plant. They will be having really pretty, tiny yellow flowers now already. I don't think there are very many of these at Reynolda in the woods, but there could be. Walnut Bottoms Epithania is pretty full of spicebush. So this is a top one. And I would say, you know, in landscaped areas, the biggest improvement that you can make for birds is usually in these fall berry producing plants. This is usually what our landscape areas are lacking, in part because things like Chinese privet, Japanese privet, these really nice evergreen bushes are just more popular in landscaping. So, but those again are food deserts for birds. So another great berry for fall migration is our native flowering dogwood. These are really common. And I know these are throughout Reynolda and throughout our yards and throughout our city. These berries are about 25% fat. So another very, very good, nutritious food source for birds as they're making their southward journey. That's a rusty blackbird, by the way. I have seen them at Reynolda and they're very cool. Okay, so if you're like, how do I know what birds I'm seeing? This is a couple minutes of how-to for you. We have a free Audubon Bird Guide app. You can find it at the App Store, wherever you get your apps. And it's great. My favorite feature is that you can, you know, say you wanted to know, has anybody seen a green heron in the area? You can type in green heron, you can hit that sightings button, and you will see a map and you can see where those birds have been. You can also just look at the recent sightings at Reynolda or whatever hotspot you want to visit. If you're new to learning the names of birds, it's a really neat way to kind of level set your expectations of what is probably around you. Although again, like I said, with birds, anything is possible. There's also a neat feature of the app where you can, you know, pick out the size of the bird you're looking at and the color and the shape, and it will assist you in identifying birds. So free Audubon Bird Guide app is fantastic. And then as far as native plants go, we have, actually the URL is at the top of the screen, audubon.org/plants for birds. You can type in your zip code and get a list of plants that are native to your zip code. And you can choose all kinds of things. Oh, sorry, I was muted. I don't think you missed much. So you type in your zip code and you get a list of the best results to a bunch of plants native to your zip code that are just fantastic for birds. You can choose, if you have a favorite group of birds, you can choose what group of birds you want to attract. You can choose, there we go. You can choose what kind of plant you're looking for. I get lots of requests for, I really want an evergreen shrub for birds. So you can choose evergreen. You can choose, if you're moved by my story about the chickadees, you can choose caterpillars, nectar for hummingbirds. You can really choose whatever you're looking for, and it'll generate a list for you. Also, you can click the local resources tab. And this is where I give a really big shout out to Reynolda Gardens. And I want to emphasize what John said earlier. Make sure that before the plant sale comes around, that if you want plants, you pre-order. I was a super slacker for the fall plant sale, and I signed up to shop in person at the very end of the last day. There are some sycamore trees left, and I didn't have room for one of those. So anyway, an amazing array of native plants, just 10 years ago, really 8 years ago, when Audubon in earnest started working to promote native plants, you wouldn't have been able to find that variety of native plant species available for sale anywhere in Forsyth County. And now look at all these options. So it's great. Definitely. I also want to give a shout out to Frank's Perennial Border, and then Mitchell's Nursery and Greenhouse has a very, very good variety of trees and shrubs that are native to North Carolina. So, but also go buy plants wherever you like to go plants, and ask them which plants are native to North Carolina and which ones are good for birds. So the more we all ask for that, the more they're going to be available for sale. For anyone who wants an absolutely ridiculous amount of information, should I say comprehensive, we also do have a giant spreadsheet. It was created by Lisa Laughlin Gould and Susan Andrews here in Winston-Salem, in partnership with Audubon North Carolina as part of our Bird Friendly Communities program. It's fantastic. We developed it in part because landscape architects and other professionals were saying, I don't want to have to buy an entire library of books. I need all this information about each plant in one place. So this is another resource you can access on our website if you'd like that level of detail. Basically, I go to this big spreadsheet when I'm ready to plant something, and I want to know how tall, how wide, how much water does it need, how much sunlight, and also very pretty specific level, what wildlife will it support. A lot of organizations have really good yard certifications. There's National Wildlife Federation. There's Monarch Way Stations. We also have a yard sign at Audubon. It's totally on the honor system. Anybody can buy one for $25 on our website. And they look really pretty in the garden. So I want to recommend that. And the reason to do it, you can brag about your efforts to help birds, but also it just spreads. If your neighbors see the sign, they're more likely to ask you, what are you planting there? And this garden, actually, we partnered with the First Lady of North Carolina, Kristen Cooper, on this garden at the Governor's Western Residence in Asheville. So I feel like we're pretty lucky to have a First Lady who is such a big fan of birds. There's a beautiful bird garden at the Governor's Mansion in Raleigh as well. And then our neighbors to the south in South Carolina also have a bird garden. So that's the end of my slides. I would love to spend the last 10 minutes on questions and answers. Also, please feel free to reach out. If you subscribe to Audubon emails, you already have my email address. But I'd love to hear from people, especially around plants for birds and gardening.
So I think if anyone wants to put any questions into the chat box, and we can relay them on that way. But I was going to say, I try to do a walk every morning before my day starts, and I noticed that there was lindera flowering in the woods along the little creek. So we've got a handful of plants. So I was excited to see that.
Great. Do you want to give a shout out, John? I don't know who maintains the wildflower garden by the creek where the stairs go down, but that's also a great thing.
So right now, Amy Dixon, one of our newest people, but she really has a keen interest in working along the trails, and I want to give a shout out to her because she really wants to work in that garden, and it is a goal of ours to kick all the invasives out of that space. But I also really want to work on some interpretive signage in that garden, because it's, I feel like it's great when you get people excited about native plants, but they're like, oh, what is that? And there's no label. So we do want to make it a little easier for people to look up plants and figure out some ways to do that. But yeah, that garden really has impressed me, the diversity that's in there, and I only want to amp it up even more. As anyone that knows me, I'm a certified plant addict, and I'm fine with that.
Great. So question for you, John, are you planning to sell Spice Bush at the upcoming plant sale?
I don't think we have it slated for, spring. We've got so much for the spring sale, but I think we can put it on the list for, I think Hayden's on this call too, but we definitely need to put it on the list, because I know Lee Nading dropped a plant off, and she was talking about Spice Bush Swallowtail in particular. And so we have one plant, but definitely if we can track some down, we'll add it to the fall plant sale. I got really excited. We finally bought a new house in November, and we've been exploring the 11 acres around it. And I got really excited because there's a bottomland that has Spice Bush in it. So I was excited.
That is wonderful.
So someone was asking about what apps you would recommend to identify birds by their sound or song. And I'm surprised this didn't come from my dad, because I know there was one bird that drove him absolutely bonkers.
Well, and apps are great, but they don't always include all the vocalization a bird can make. Deidre from our local Forsyth Audubon chapter, one of the leaders, recommends Merlin Bird ID in the chat box here. I highly recommend Merlin. It's designed to help you identify birds. And then the Audubon Bird Guide app will also be helpful in identifying birds. I think as far as song goes, it usually helps if you have a guess first, and then you can, all of these apps have bird sounds on them. It's still pretty easy to get stumped. And there are some cool platforms out there that are fairly new that I haven't tested. But there's, as everything becomes more advanced, there's definitely tools coming on that. For now, ask a friend when it comes to song. Yeah. Well, and two, go out with, I'm sure Forsyth Audubon will be resuming public bird walks soon that are just open to everybody as soon as that, feels more safe in Forsyth County. And that's probably the easiest way for a lot of people to learn to identify birds, is both to go out with others who will point out, the diagnostic features of each bird, will hear the song and tell you. That's a lot easier than figuring it out on your own. Also, I encourage everybody to, if you're keenly interested in birds, sign up for Forsyth Audubon's listserv, because that's a place where people share a lot of recent sightings. You just get up to speed so much faster if you know what other people are seeing and kind of what to expect. Still, anything is possible, but yeah, highly recommended.
Someone was asking about what equipment you recommend for bird watching.
Yeah, so binoculars are really helpful for getting a close-up look, although I would argue you can enjoy an awful lot about birds without binoculars. But yeah, so if you're looking to invest in some equipment, 8 power, 8x40 binoculars are really popular. There's a great article, actually, like every year, I think Audubon.org publishes, field tests the equipment and makes recommendations based for each different price range. So a good pair of binoculars is great. Cameras are totally unbeknownst to me. Sorry about that. So I can't comment on that. And then I don't have a spotting scope. I prefer to, that for me, that's just a good reason to remind me to ask to go out with a friend sometimes. When you want, you need to see something that's very far away, like a really cool looking duck in the middle of Salem Lake.
I know I've heard the barred, I loved it one day because I had to go back and look it up, but what the call I heard was great horned owl up by the meadow. And then when I got down towards Lake Catherine, I heard barred owls. And I'd love to see, if there's a possibility, I'd love to get owl boxes, if that's effective or not, because it's just so spectacular to see those in the woods.
Yeah, so I feel like an old timer, even though I moved here just 15 years ago, but at the time I moved here, we could still find great horned owls pretty easily. And then there's an eastern screech owl, the little tiny owl, like this big with little tiny ear tufts, so cute. There was one with a roosting spot right along the paved walkway. Barred owls have just become more and more abundant across Winston-Salem. And we just see less and less of the great horns and the eastern screech owls.
Do they outcompete each other, or is it a territorial thing? Like, barred owls there, you're not going to have the great horn.
I'm not sure if it's competition or some people accuse the barred owl of direct predation. I'm not sure that's been absolutely verified, but yeah, there's, certainly competition, and they do seem to exclude each other. So, yeah.
And someone was asking, what breed of ducks can you find on Lake Catherine? I know I've seen mallards.
Saw mallards over the weekend. So there's some wood duck boxes out there placed by First Life Audubon members. And you certainly can see wood ducks at Reynolda. Whether or not they stay and breed in the boxes, or, for that matter, in tree, there's an abundant array of tree cavities, as I was mentioning, that are just great habitat. Whether or not they stay and breed is something I would encourage everybody to try to find out. And if you do, make sure that you make sure those data are part of the North Carolina Bird Atlas.
Oh, cool. I know we had a single turkey that wandered around here for last year, and we're kind of getting a kick at our house. We now have a pair that are hopefully they don't get too confident and I can't get in my house, but
yeah, that's very cool.
I think that's about, I don't know if I've got any more questions, but I have been recording this. I remember just like a second after Barbara started speaking, I was like, oh, I knew it. But we do have this recorded, so we'll get that on the website, and that way, people, if you came in late or you had to leave early, well, if you had to leave early, you aren't hearing me right now, but you can still get all this great information. And Kim, I appreciate your time. I really look forward to working with Audubon more in the future. I'd love to have something as we develop our website that there's a flora and fauna tab of Reynolda, so people can get an idea of what they should be looking for. I think that'd be fantastic. But no, it's always, I purposely do not wear headphones when I walk in the morning because I love listening to all the birds, and it's fantastic. And I think this is a great resource for our community of having this place and the diversity that's here.
Agreed. Thank you for stewarding it so beautifully. Much appreciated.
We're doing everything we can. And as I said to everyone, if you aren't a member, do consider becoming one, because that makes us achieve everything we do and strive for it to be even better. But with that said, we'll go ahead, and my stomach's growling. I'm hungry. I might have to try some Lindera berries.
Definitely.
All right,
thanks, everybody. This was fun. Thanks for having me, John, and thanks for everybody for coming. Bye.
Yeah. Stay safe out there.